You are listening to the Mindset Forge podcast. I'm Barton Bryan, your host, interviewing athletes and performing artists on how they show up for the big moments. So here we go. I've got Clark Smith, swam in the 2016 Olympics in Rio, got a gold medal, went to University of Texas, swam there for 4 years. Lots of stories about swimming, growing up with two elite swimmers as parents, how that affected him, their life lessons, things that they taught him on mindset that helped him get to the highest level. He's got so many perspectives, but it's not necessarily the, wow, swimming's amazing. He's got some sobering thoughts on swimming, competition at the highest level, what it all means, and who he is now as he transitions into a new part of his life. So buckle up. Clark Smith's the real deal. He's going to give you some really great life lessons and perspectives on being an elite swimmer. So without further ado, Clark Smith. Well, Clark, first off, thanks for being here. Really great to have you here in person. I want to talk to you about just micro level. Take us to that moment where you're about to step on the blocks. It's a big meet, whether it's the Olympics or NCAA swim meet. What are you doing to prepare yourself to get in the right headspace to be as effective as possible?
I think, for me at least, I always like to try to think about nothing. Maybe in a way, kind of give yourself like an existential crisis, like just telling yourself this race doesn't matter and that nothing really matters, and that kind of alleviates it for me. I don't know if that would freak other people out, but that's just kind of the mindset I try to get in, just because I think it's easier to think about nothing. And I don't know, for the most part, the things you can control are pretty minimal when it comes to something like swimming, like the way you feel, who's next to you. But the races are almost a bit predetermined relative to other sports. Like, you kind of know who's going to win a heat for the most part, if you know a little bit about the sport. And I always felt like what's going to happen is going to happen.
So you kind of don't focus on the things you can't control, like who's next to you and things like that. How do you do that, like to take out the pressure that one puts on himself? I mean, I love the concept of like, it's just a race. Like, don't freak out over how big the race is, but like, how does that actually work for you?
Yeah, it's a lot easier or a lot harder than it sounds to kind of let your mind go blank. I had parents that were swimmers, and that helped me a lot growing up, kind of just preparing for bigger meets and kind of learning to let yourself off the hook if you don't really get the outcome that you want. And my dad always had a funny saying. He goes, if you can't live with yourself, how the hell could you expect anyone else to? So, I mean, can you like yourself if you don't get the outcome that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so much, I mean, especially in an individual sport, like I could imagine, because I didn't swim, but I can imagine that there's it's easy to put a lot of pressure on yourself, to have a lot of that, like, I failed, or I didn't do the best job as I could, and that can have a negative impact. So talk about your parents. I know your dad was an NCAA swimmer. Was he at UT, right?
He was at UT. He was part of their first national championship team back in 1981.
Okay. And then your mom, also a swimmer, got to the Olympics too, and is 84?
Yeah, mom was a swimmer, I think 84 to 87. So
wow.
Both, I think, met at like a swim team party, and eventually I came out.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, and so often having parents that are high level can be probably a combination of two things. I'm imagining very helpful in terms of like your father giving that perspective, but also maybe some pressure too, because like, hey, they are such high achievers in their own right, in their own light. Did you feel, whether or not they put that on you, did you feel some sort of need or desire to kind of, achieve, the way they did?
They did a really good job not ever putting that kind of pressure on me, but I think it's only natural if you have parents that are successful in anything. If you have a child who's pursuing the same path, they're going to compare themselves to their parents.
Sure.
So I did compare myself to my parents' times and rankings. I tried not to obsess about it, but I mean, it was always kind of in the background, and they never did anything to kind of make me feel like I wasn't on track, so to speak.
Yeah.
That just wasn't their personality, but I think they kind of saw I was a bit neurotic and intense in high school, and they kind of helped me get out of that. They really helped me prepare me well for failure, because that's inevitable in anything that you kind of pursue, and it happens a lot the further along you get into something.
Well, I'll talk about your relationship with failure, because in an early interview, I interviewed Brandon Hansen, and he was talking a lot about failure and how much fuel he got from that. Talk about your personal relationship with failing in swimming, or just like the concept of it and how you use it?
I think initially, like I had a pretty consistent progression time-wise until I got to college. And the first time I really felt like I'd really failed in the sport was when I think the NCAA championships were my freshman year at the University of Texas. And I think it was Cal and Texas were the top two seeds going into the meet. I didn't qualify for the meet. I didn't hit the times I did the year prior. And we lost the meet by like a deficit of points that I probably should have made up if I had made the meet. So that was kind of my first experience with like hitting a wall, so to speak. And the more you fail, I feel like the easier it gets. I kind of wish I failed a bit more when I was younger. I think there's a bit of a big fish in a small pond. I think most swimmers are, because it's kind of a niche sport. And if you're really good at it, I mean, the other people who are at your level are spread out across the country. And then when you get kind of gathered in for this NCAA championship meet, you know, you're a little fish regardless of where you come from.
Yeah, and you're 6'9", so that's a metaphorical concept, but for you. But yeah, I mean, I can imagine, like, if you're the best in your city, you know, you're winning everything, and then you show up at UT and everyone's the best from their, you know, area of the country, and so you have to kind of see where you end up. But that's that type of moment to me seems like the fact that you didn't qualify, you know, you had a personal failure in not qualifying, but also there was a team related kind of like feeling of responsibility. Is that correct?
Yeah, that too, because you don't really experience the team aspect of the sport truly until you get to college. I think that's true for most swimmers. So it's a bit of a shift too. You're not just competing for yourself, but you're competing, you know, for a group, your friends. And I think for the most part, there's only like a small 4-year gap where you get to experience that. And that's why I always felt like the NCAAs was the most intense meet I ever witnessed or swam in. I think more so than like the Olympics or World Championships. Like it's a pressure-packed meet. And I've talked to a few swimmers who kind of follow the same sentiment.
So go deeper with that. Like, I mean, everyone would assume the bigger the meet, right? Like if you're talking about World Championships or the Olympics, that must be the most pressure. That must be the most difficult. But why are you saying that the NCAA meets were like that?
Just from what I've witnessed in the stands, and maybe a little bit from being behind the blocks, I feel like when you are with a team, I think fans are a bit more engaged. When you're swimming internationally, I mean, you have your countries representing you, but the Olympic team or a World Championship team is not as close-knit as like a college team, because you don't train together every single day.
Right.
And there's more of a fan base with those collegiate teams. It feels like more of a Super Bowl of swimming in a way. Not to disparage the Olympics, because it is the end-all be-all, I think, for most athletes.
Well, you could kind of relate it to, and I'll always relate things to basketball, but like the Olympics were always like take your 12 best and just throw them out there, and you would hope that the talent was always good enough to win the gold. You might get some of that with swimming too. It's like you take your best swimmers in the entire country, but it's not really a cohesive team like UT swimming was, like where you guys are just brothers in arms in a sense.
Oh yeah, I felt more pride, I think, being a national champion with like my fellow Longhorn swimmers. I mean, it's a completely different feeling. It's a bit more rewarding when you're kind of, I don't know, in a way, suffering together. Misery loves company, and then you get to walk away with a title. Whereas if you make an international team, I mean, they're great guys and girls you're swimming with and training with leading up to it a few weeks before those meets, but it's not really the same. Yeah,
no, it's an excellent point. Go back to the freshman year. You weren't able to swim with your team for the national championship. How did that fuel you?
Oh, it was awful. And I tried not to think about it. I ended up just putting all my negative energy into workouts, and I, in a way, started to learn I could use workouts as like an outlet. And I think the next year I went from not making the team to winning NCAA. So it was kind of a big 180. I just kind of learned from there, one season doesn't predetermine the next. And then the year after that, I was expected to win an event or two at the NCAA championships, and I didn't even final. So it was just kind of like a mountain in terms of improvement. So it goes up and down.
So, and failure is such a weird thing, because some people will talk about their life and they'll mention a failure as if it's like the thing that defined the rest of the failures in their life, right? And there are other people like yourself who take a failure and turn it into the motivation, whether it's, the anger from the frustrations, the things that you felt, and that you just use it to fuel your workouts and push you to that next level. Talk about, and maybe with perspective, I mean, you're talking about, 6-7 years ago. Did you feel like that was the healthiest way to do it? Or did you feel like, had you been able to tell yourself maybe a little bit differently at this with perspective? I know you're a coach now too. Like, do you feel like you did it the right way at that age? Or do you feel like maybe you could have had a little bit more of a balanced approach that next season?
I think I could have trained smarter, but I think it was a healthy approach to staying motivated. I think workouts for me were therapeutic. Some people kind of train so they can race, and other people race so they can train. I don't know if you're one of those people who like to compete a lot, or if you like the routine of just going through the day-to-day. I like the workouts a bit more. So that made life easy for swimming, because that's 99% of what you do. Right.
You're always training. And it's, that's interesting too. I think some people, and I think a lot of people find that kind of release from just going to the gym or going to the pool or going for that run. And I think if that's who you tend to be, then I think you lean into that. It sounds like that's what you did.
Yeah, I do like the routine. I like the endorphins. I don't know. I like comparing myself splits wise, because swimming is so objective. You just know exactly where you are and if you're better and if you're not. And that's kind of a blessing and a curse. Other sports are a bit objective as far as your performance. Like, people can argue on if someone is doing better than someone else. But with swimming, you know where you're at, and I feel like that makes it easier to make incremental improvements.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because like, you're always being timed, whether it's your splits in practice or, in a race, exactly what you got. And everyone across the world has that exact same, race that they ran or swam, and you can see exactly where you kind of line up with everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of one of the things I loved and hated about swimming, because eventually what's fast doesn't seem fast anymore. So if you get to a certain level, what used to impress you or what would have been your goal eventually seems like, I don't know, mundane.
Like I think that's, everyone aspires to be, to hit a certain point, right? Like, I think if you're running a race and you're like, I got to get a 6-minute mile, that's my goal. The CEO of my company, he's like, had this whole mantra about 6-minute mile, and then you get to it, right? And then you got to reset a goal, because you can't just run a 6-minute mile over and over and again and expect to be happy, right? We got to set a new goal, right?
And even if you're making small improvements, say you go like 5:55 the next year, and then you go 5:54, it gets frustrating because you're almost where you were at, but you're still, a lot faster than when you initially started. So you really lose perspective the further in you get to it. And I look back at times where I've gotten out of races and done really well and said, man, I swam like crap, and other people were around me that maybe weren't at the same level. I was like, I wonder how I made them feel by saying that.
Yeah, like in your mind, relative to yourself, like that wasn't your best. But to everybody else, they were like, oh my gosh, like, is that kind of what you're talking about? Like,
yeah, for the most part, just the perspective just gets completely lost.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, and I don't know, with times, they're so objective, like you just, I don't know, in a way, you can't really argue with the outcome.
Right.
You're stuck with it. You have to live with it. And the only thing you can do is either accept it or make excuses, in which most people do the latter. And I did that too. So.
Well, and a fellow UT swimmer of yours, he swam about 15 years before you, Chris Kemp, he told me about how he would hear some of your splits at UT and just be blown away by some of the speeds that you were doing, some of your practice splits, because when things happen and they're kind of legendary, they come, maybe Eddie Reese is telling somebody who's telling somebody else who's getting to this, alumni swimmer who hears about what you're doing, 15 years later, and he's like blown away by some of the speed that you're doing this stuff at. What do you attribute to that kind of effort you found at practice? I think practice is a hard thing for people to kind of put everything into. A lot of people are kind of saving or thinking that practice is to practice and the performance is for my best. Like, how do you find the most when you practice?
Well, I think it comes down to the group that you're with. For instance, we had Joe Schooling, American record or U.S. Open record holder, 100-200 fly. Jack Conger, American record holder, 2 fly. Townley House, American record holder, 2 free. Yeah. Willa Cohn, American record holder, 2 breast. We'd NCAA champions in almost every stroke. if you're winning NCAAs, you're almost just one of the faces in the crowd.
Right.
And I wasn't the best swimmer on the team at all. I mean, I was just another guy.
Yeah.
And I good training partners within my own group. There was a guy, Michael McBroom, I used to train with. He was world championship medalist, individual, I think 800 freestyle. Probably one of the best trainers I've ever seen or heard of. So, I mean, it's who you're with that kind of, I think, propels you. Getting beat helps a lot more than being the big fish.
Right. Now you have something to chase. You got something to work towards.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I used to call it a nemesis. Not that they're kind of your enemy, but like to have some kind of like person or thing out there that you're chasing just really is a motivator.
It really helps when they're right next to you too, because I mean you can't run away from it.
They're right there, and you see their time, you see your time, and you can really
like you're either behind them or they're ahead of you or they're next to you, and you have to obsess over it for 2 hours, or at least I did. Maybe I'm just crazy.
Yeah.
Some people maybe can just let that go.
Well, I think you know, when you get to that level of performance, and let me be clear, I was never a college athlete. And so, but from what, you know, the conversations I've had, the coaches I've talked to, the kind of, you know, the people that I've in this industry talk about, everyone's different. Like you're talking about, you know, just having an existential conversation before, you know, a big race, right? Somebody else might have something completely different that helps them process.
Oh yeah.
Things,
and I've witnessed that firsthand.
And that it's not about like you got to do what coach tells you. No, you got to find what works for you, what gets the best performance out of you specifically, not, you know, what your neighbor's doing, what your teammates doing.
There are guys that are fueled off negative emotion. There are some that do it to feed their egos. There are some that just want to be great. Maybe some guys chase social status through whatever outcome they want. And there's some guys that are just aloof and can just go really fast because they're that talented. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's like 100 ways you can get to the top.
Right.
I don't think there's one way to kind of, emulate. So yeah, you gotta have to do what works for you. For me, it was like, this was like a good outlet for my neuroses in a way.
Well, so I was reading up about you. I'm really blown away by the fact that it sounds like you came into UT as a freshman, thinking you're going to be a sprinter. 100-meter fly, 100-meter free, things like that. And then you kind of transitioned into a long distance, and that became your bread and butter. Talk about that time, how that kind of played out.
Oh, I was just unnecessary in my events that I got recruited for. Like, I was okay at them. But like I said, those two names, Jack Conger and Joe Schooling. Mm-hmm. Joe was the Olympic champion in the 100 fly. He's won NCAAs in the 100 and 200. And then Jack Conger, I think, currently has the American record in the 200-yard fly. So, like, what do you need me for? You got to put your guys, where you're weak. And we didn't have any distance swimmers I didn't think were scoring too much. So that's where I was.
Yeah. So you kind of looked at the landscape and you said, well, we got these guys doing what I was recruited for. What if I find my lane in this? Now, but that's not necessarily something that everyone can just do. So how did you discover that the longer distances would work for you?
I think through workouts you can kind of tell by how you split workouts and how you can kind of pace yourself and how consistent you are. And I think there was just a regular kind of aloof meet that we did every year called like the Eddie Reese Invite, named after my coach. Mm-hmm. And you do just weird distances. I did like a time 2000 free just because. And I think the time I hit at the mile on the way out would have been like third at NCAAs the year before or something like that. So I was like, well, I guess this is where I'm going to be for a while.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, I always viewed distance athletes as, people who were doing events that no one else wanted to do. And I feel like it relies more on training and less so on talent. You can't fake a longer race for the most part. So that you can kind of work your way into it a bit more than other events.
Go deeper with that. Like, are you saying like for like 100-meter fly, like it's only 40 some seconds long, right? So like, how long is a 100-meter fly?
100-meter fly, 49 to 51 seconds.
Right. So you not a lot of time to either hit the water and do everything right or you don't, right? It's kind of, there's not a lot
you either have like the natural strength and athleticism and size to do a sprint event or you don't. Whereas distance swimming, there are a lot of guys who are great at 100s and 200s. I think could work their way up to the mile and do the things that I did. So I think there's just less depth in the long races because A, no one wants to do it, and B,
it's not as sexy.
It's not as sexy.
Everyone wants to sprint.
Yeah, my dad always said, Clark, the medals are the same size in the mile. He's trying to persuade me. I'm like,
yeah. Well, and while you're growing up and going through this, you got Michael Phelps winning all these sprint. He was a sprinter, and so kind of glorified the sport around at least to the layman viewer. Like you start watching all these people. And then,
like the blue ribbon events are like the hundreds. I mean,
right.
In a way, like
200.
I always felt like the masculine event was like the 100 free and the 100 fly. Those are my favorite events too.
Yeah.
But I mean, what you're good at isn't necessarily what your best events are going to be, or what your talents are.
Sure. Yeah, and then you get people like Katie Ledecky who come out and like they're winning these 800 meter events or whatever, and those long distance by like an entire length.
There is something to say about like true distance athletes, like swimmers who are great at like the 1500 and up, or like runners who are good at marathons. That's a different breed in and of itself. The depth falls off quickly. There's very few of them who like really exist.
Okay.
I feel like the same goes with like true sprinters, like 100 meter dash, 50 meter freestyle. Like there are very few people whose best event is truly a really short event. I think most people fall somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
I was somewhere in the middle.
Gotcha.
But you can kind of stretch yourself.
When you're talking about the long distance that this is the 200, 400, 800, that kind of, is that kind of your sweet spot?
Yeah, and you can kind of pull yourself in one direction or the other.
Got it.
But to be a complete freak, like, I mean, not to disparage anyone who's really, really good at those events.
Yeah.
Like that's something that's very, very rare, I feel like, and I wasn't one of those.
So you're obviously very tall. Like, what does your body type really help facilitate for you? Are you is it like, because I know people talked about like, oh, Michael Phelps has like a really long torso, and like what are some of the things that like somebody's body can actually help them with in the water swimming with whether it's long distance or speed?
From what I witness, it seems like a larger body helps you more in sprints. I have really no idea. It seems like you get diminishing returns after a certain point. I feel like in a short course pool, it helps to be tall.
Yeah.
But over a really long race, you'd think it'd be helpful to be a bit smaller and carry less mass.
Yeah.
But you see,
a lot
extremes
of
on both ends.
Too.
Yeah, you see guys who are in the 50 at the Olympics who are, 6 feet tall, which is smaller on the men's side for like a sprinter, and then you see guys in the mile who are like 6'7", like Grant Hackett's one name I can think of that was huge. So I have no idea. I don't really think there's like a rule to it.
Yeah,
it's still
about your talent and your work ethic.
I think your feel for the water and your flexibility and your training, your heart lung capacity. I mean, those are more important than your size. It's just what's most visible. So it's what people are going to assume you can do.
Yeah. So you talked about freshman year, kind of the failure of the national championship, and then coming back your sophomore year and really having a very strong year, and then something happened junior year. So talk about what happened, kind of the ebb and flow of your college career and what you learned from that.
Oh yeah, like I think it was my junior year. I was expected to win, I think, the 500 and the mile at NCAA, so I was seated first in both events, and I think I had broken the 1,000 American record mid-season. And I come into the meet and I got sick, and I slept horrible the night before the race. I didn't even make finals in the 500, and I swam the mile, and I was just trying not to get lapped. I felt so bad. It's really funny looking back at it. I was so mad during that moment, but it's kind of, I don't know, you can kind of let that go once you're far away from that.
Thinking back to that, like, is there anything you felt like, hindsight being 2020? Like, I mean, I know like all these factors were there. Like, is there anything you would have done different, or just told yourself, or like that you learned from that moment that maybe with perspective you could have done differently?
Not really. I think that was as best as I could have performed at that moment. I lost a good amount of weight, and then my senior year I did well again. I was able to win an event or two.
So when you got sick, it was not like I got a cold.
No, I was like 189 pounds at the meet.
Oh, okay. So you had lost a lot of muscle, and
I was already like a really weak, wiry kind of guy, so I didn't have much muscle
to lose. You didn't have any to lose. All right, so this was pretty substantial with you. And then you have a kind of an aorta AFib situation. Talk about that and how that played out in your swimming career.
I don't know. I think it's pretty common in most distance athletes. I've never really experienced any really bad injuries or had chronic pain like most swimmers do. I see a lot of swimmers who have a lot of shoulder problems even post-retirement. So I'm pretty thankful I never really had to then I'll deal with anything that was that bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think, for one of the probably positives about being a swimmer is, you don't have it's not a lot of impact, right? You're, besides pushing off a wall, playing basketball, doing, running, you got a lot of impact on your knees and joints and stuff like that.
Yeah, I never got injured swimming, but I started running after I quit. Holy crap, I've had every lower body injury you can think of. You name it, I've had it.
Yeah, I think at some point they're eventually going to come out and say, if you're over 6'4", probably limit the amount of running you're doing. It's really challenging to be tall and run.
Yeah, it makes me realize that swimmers aren't really real athletes for the most part. There are very few great swimmers who would make great athletes in other sports. You're like one-trick ponies.
Well, it's like a dolphin. I mean, you're incredible at one thing, but you're a sea animal in a sense. You're a sea athlete, and it doesn't necessarily translate. I mean, you think about like a bodybuilder going to the pool and trying to swim across the lane. They would just sink.
I'd rather just be a bodybuilder and never get in the water. Man. I never look like that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, UT. I mean, you grew up in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about just early years. I know you started swimming when you were 4 or so. Like, what were you like as a kid? Talk about some of that time, like kind of that helped you really understand that swimming was really going to be where you ended up.
Well, I got put in the sport pretty young because both my parents competed.
Makes sense.
From like the age of 4 to 14 or 13, I didn't really like it. It felt like something I kind of had to do.
Okay.
And then I kind of sat down with my parents and I told them I wanted to quit. I think around 7th, 8th grade.
No, nobody was like, hey, you're going to be really tall. Here's a basketball.
Well, I think they alluded to that. And they gave me the option to kind of walk away from the sport. And in like a sick, twisted way, knowing I could keep one foot out the door made me feel like I could make it my own. Like, no, I didn't have to do it. Made me feel like I got to do it.
Interesting.
And that's when I started to improve a lot more.
So you felt that you had to be in the pool. And then once they said you don't, then all of a sudden it became yours.
Oh, yeah. That's when I started to enjoy workouts and I started to have my own goals.
That's such an interesting, it's just a side note. As a parent with an 8-year-old, and a lot of parents listen to this, like, think about that with your kid. If you're insisting that your kid do something because you love that.
Well, I think when the kid's really young, you got to drag them to work out because an 8-year-old would stay on an iPad all day.
That is fair. That is true. We didn't have iPad. Well, I guess you probably had technology. Didn't. I didn't have that growing up, but yeah, I think I think you want to figure out what they like, mm-hmm. and try them out in different things, and because if they own it, then like you're talking about, it's a different relationship you have to the sport when you really want to be there.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because with swimming you have to start young to develop that kind of ability.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a higher burnout rate in the sport because you have a bunch of kids who have to be hyper motivated to be able to train like that.
Yeah.
Luckily, I never really felt like that, but I understand people who just feel sick of it and kind of just stray away from the sport. I feel like most of my friends don't really have a relationship with swimming anymore that I competed with.
Yeah, I have a good family friend in Las Vegas who was, nationally ranked swimmer all the way through high school, and then like she graduated high school and she's like, I'm done, and she just quit completely. And then like she was on the UNLV campus like 4 years later, and the swim coach said, aren't you Jackie Hoover? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, you want to swim for us? I remember you. And like she came out, tried out, and made the team, and ended up like swimming like from 22 to 24 when and just had the best time because she was mature enough at that point to love it and to like fully embrace the experience of being in college and being a swimmer.
I think you see that with most athletes, even at the higher end. You can tell the ones that get just sick of it, even if they're doing really well and repeating really good performances, they kind of have enough at a certain point. It's kind of sad, and it makes you wonder who really likes the sport and who likes the accolades more. I don't know if there are a lot of people who love the sports that they do. I feel like competition can kind of suck the fun out of it if you do lose perspective. So,
yeah, it's definitely a challenge because I was just interviewing she was a college swimmer who was watching the Olympics in 2021. That was, of course, the 2020 Olympic Games, and they were talking about Katie Ledecky and Simone Biles and a lot of these swimmers and other athletes who were just having so much like mental challenges within the sport, and I believe it was Michael Phelps who kind of acknowledged it and said, yeah, sometimes we just need someone to listen and not try to fix our problem or not try to like, get us to be more effective by like having a conversation with, it's like that idea of like, when you become such a high level athlete, everyone's trying to like get the best out of you. Everyone's trying to coach you up. Everyone's got kind of a dog in the hunt for you to be successful, and asking for that need of people around them to just kind of embrace and love you and not put expectations on you. Did you feel that?
No, I was never in the sport long enough to get burnt out, I don't think. And I think for the most part, I feel like that's always prevalent. I think people are just more open to talking about it. And I imagine the problem's worse because people are competing longer and longer within each sport.
Okay.
Which means you spend more of your life dedicated to this one thing, and it's kind of your sole identity. And, eventually you're going to have to break it. I mean, what happens when you kind of have to start life over at age 30 or 40? Like, there are certain athletes the last few years who are super high profile that retire and come back because what else is there?
Right. Like they miss it. It's that connection to the part of themselves that has, there's so much value about being that person.
But it's like you're going to have to walk away from that identity because, biology, your body can't take that for so many years.
How did you do it? How did you walk away?
I just stopped improving. Like I just knew I wasn't going to get to where I wanted to be. And it was an easy decision. I think I had gone like 2 or 3 years without like getting any better, but I'd put everything I could have into the workout. So it was, kind of easy for me to accept.
Mm-hmm.
I think back in my parents' day, like you just retired after college, like you just finished because there wasn't really any money in the sport. And I imagine that'd be harder if you wanted to keep on going, if there wasn't the opportunity to. So I kind of went out on my own terms in a way. Like, yeah, there's nothing really left here. I've wrung out the towel as much as I could.
Yeah.
And I hit the little accolades I wanted to get as a kid. So I felt very lucky. I was very fortunate because really it's just luck of the draw when it comes to, really elite level sports. You just got to be born in the right body for the most part.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many people, out there who, have a goal that they never quite reach.
Mm-hmm.
And you were lucky enough to do the work at UT and then also be selected to go, earn the spot on the Olympic team at Rio de Janeiro in 2016, swimming by the 4x200. Talk about going to Rio and just that whole experience and kind of what you learned from being on that stage.
I was lucky to make the relay. I was training distance at that time, and I thought I was going to make the 400 free or the mile, just longer events. And I ended up doing poorly in the longer events of that meet and better in the shorter events. I don't know, just because it's hard to kind of time your training with swimming. Tapering is weird. And I was able to qualify for a relay, and at that point, if you had made a men's relay, you're pretty much going to get a gold medal. So, I finished the race, and I saw I got a certain place. I'm like, there's a good chance I could be an Olympic medalist in a month. It was kind of weird to think about.
Yeah.
Kind of process it all at once. But, I didn't do as well as I wanted to at that meet. Like, I wish I had performed the way I wanted to. So, there's always more that you want.
Yeah.
No matter what level you get to, there's always a little bit that you didn't get. So
Sure.
that's kind of a blessing and a curse to have.
Yeah. And I felt like there's such a, I think that happens all the time. And I think it's our ability to like find the wins and then process the loss, but not necessarily let it like consume us. Right. Because if you're swimming one event, you do well, and then you swim 2 other events, which you don't do well. Like, are you going to walk away and just think about the things that you didn't do well? Are you going to have how do you deal with that type of thing?
Well, I feel pretty good about just my experiences, and my parents helped me a lot with that just along the way, just kind of feeling good about yourself, because you're not your time. And
you are not your time.
And whether or not you get a medal, I promise you, no one will give a shit. Like, no one's going to care, after you're done swimming, if you're an Olympic medalist, especially if you're a dick. Like, if you're a great athlete and you just suck, like, no one's going to want to be around you no matter how great you are at something. And I was kind of an ass when I swam, especially when I was a bit younger. So I tried to pull away from that identity towards the end of my career a little bit.
How did that serve you? Because I think that's not an atypical situation where somebody might, whether it's ego, whether it's just like finding like this competitive edge that kind of makes them a dick. Like, what did you feel like was working for you that looking back?
Oh, I was just a bit selfish just because I was just really focused on swimming. It was kind of my only identity. I think it's good to kind of diversify your self-worth and put it in multiple areas. And I put it all in swimming, which paid off in a way, but at the same time, like, I wish I was in better touch with friends I made in high school. Like, I just kind of was very tunnel vision in a way.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of my career, I kind of let it go as I was witnessing other swimmers who were as intense or more intense. I was like, oh God, I don't want to be like that anymore. Like, this doesn't really matter at all. This is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So,
yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, that killer instinct, that kind of like tunnel vision, is part of the reasons why you were able to be successful. And at some point, having the perspective, having the maturity to say that no longer serves me, or I don't want to be that person anymore. Does that sound right?
Yeah, for the most part. And there are people who get to pretty high places within sports that just stay great people. Man, I wish I had some of that when I was competing.
Yeah, I mean, good for them. I mean, I think so much of what we learn by doing sports. I mean, just this whole thing, Mindset Forge. Like, it's really about lessons learned. It's about like how can we develop by putting ourselves in whether it's athletic pursuits or artistic pursuits, getting on stage, singing in front of 150 people on stage is like walking on stage naked. It's the scariest thing you'll do.
I'd rather walk on stage naked than sing.
Yeah, and I was an opera singer, and so I have this whole background of like, playing basketball in high school and then getting on stage in college and singing opera and like in these like 17th century outfits. But the mindset, the mental game is exactly the same, right? And how we can be successful, how we can process failure and all that kind of stuff. And I think, it's what I love about what you're saying is just like, as you look back at that time, you're understanding like what served you, what no longer serves you, why you did what you did, but then who you are now is a different person.
Yeah, slightly. I think some parts of your personality never change, and then there are other aspects that are more superficial that you can kind of manipulate a bit easier.
Yeah. Well, you're coaching swimming.
Yeah, I
currently,
do
or do you kind of?
Yeah, I coach masters every now and then. More of like just showing up on deck and there to make sure that there's not like liability. Like, the master swimmers know how to swim.
What's your mantra, or like some of the things you tell your swimmers to kind of help them, just kind of be in the right space and work hard and kind of enjoy the process?
I work more with like little kids. Like, I do a lot of swim clinics around the country. Like 3-4 times a month I'll travel on weekends. And I try to kind of unload the things that I wish I wasn't, when I was a younger age. I was just really intense, and I always assumed that you had to have an upward trajectory and you had to be intense to perform well. And I always found out like my best races where I just didn't care and I wasn't thinking about anything. But that's so hard to like learn and to do. It's so much easier said than done. So
yeah,
I kind of talk about that when I go through like introductions. And I also like to, manipulate strokes and help people improve. And it's great when you work with someone who wants to improve and you can kind of see it click, when you kind of tell them something and they just get it. Yeah. They're speaking the same language.
Yeah, I wonder if, I think that's, as we think about kids, and you don't have a kid yet, right?
No, thank God.
No. It's a wonderful ride. But I think perspective changes about like what we want them to feel and experience and go through, and compared to what we went through ourselves. And I can imagine your parents, being high level swimmers themselves, tried to instill that in you, and here you are, trying to instill that, your perspective on the next generation.
Yeah, if I didn't have parents who swam, I don't know if I would have made it as far in the sport. I got a lot of guidance for them, and they helped me a lot along the way. I think I would have probably fizzled out in high school or middle school with the sport and left it.
Okay.
So most of the boys tend to leave swimming. It's kind of sad.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think generally it's not a very masculine sport, and guys in Speedos, and it's a lot of work, and there are more glamorous activities you can do. I mean, I had fun doing like playing football and baseball when I was a kid too. Mm-hmm. So it's easier to gravitate towards, other activities, especially when like they're more broadcast on TV. Like, when do you ever see swimming on TV?
They're in the Olympics.
Yeah, and like even then, like I don't even think swimming's that interesting to watch, if I'm being that honest.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think and that's where the sprints I think help.
Yep.
And the storylines, they do a great job at selling us on the new great swimmer that we all should be focused on. And
I'll give you that 50s and 100s. I'll take it.
Yeah,
it's interesting to watch, but everything else in between, I'd rather watch something else.
That's funny. I remember 2008, had the Redeem team with LeBron and Kobe and all them, and how into the swimming meets they were, because it was like, talk about two sports that are completely different, and they would all go to watch Phelps and the USA team, just dominating in the sport and just kind of embracing and enjoying this aspect of American kind of greatness.
Yeah, Beijing did a really good job hosting the games that year. I think depending on like the host country, that will help dictate whether or not people enjoy spectating the sports.
Well, and there has to be spectators too.
Yeah, and the events at that meet were amazing, not just within swimming. But I remember watching that because that's when I kind of came of age.
Yeah,
became motivated to swim, and that was part of like why I wanted, to try and go far in swimming, was because of watching Michael Phelps and Ryan Lochte and Aaron Pearsall, all those guys.
Yeah, yeah. I had a thought. You mentioned your dad and your mom and dad. Like, what are a couple of the life lessons that you remember from them growing up that really, you mentioned, that kept you in the sport, but are also just like helped keep you grounded and shape your mindset?
One thing I noticed later on is that my parents stayed very good friends with the people that they met within college and high school, and the commonality with that was that they all swam. And I just remember seeing all my dad's friends when I was younger, and they were all athletes. They all swam, and they just seemed to get along. And there was a lot of camaraderie. I don't know if you get that outside of sports. I've always felt like I appreciated the social aspect of the sport at the very end, and I think that's what most people miss when they leave it.
Yeah, like there's a commonality to like the shared suffering you go through on a day-to-day basis of swimming your various warm-ups, and I keep hearing these UT stories about how hard the warm-ups are. I mean, good Lord, 800s, at warm-up, and everyone's kind of like pushing the envelope, trying to hit, like, was it 50, 53?
I think most people go easy on the warm-ups. You just have like losers like me and a few other guys who go harder than they need to because they think it's going to help them. But
that was Brendan's whole thing.
Yeah.
Of like,
I remember Brendan always told a story like he would go too hard in warm-up, and then someone threw a kickboard at him.
Right.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah. But I mean, it's that youthful zeal too. It's that, like, I'm so competitive. I've got to be the best, and I just like can't think of any other way to do it. I'm just going to go as hard as I can on the warm up without, and you're 27, so you're probably still a ways away from this, but I'll go to the gym. I'll spend 15 to 20 minutes like doing mobility, like activating muscle groups before I ever touch a heavy weight. So like the idea that that somebody could just jump in the pool and start swimming is such a concept of a 19 or 20 year old.
When you're 19, you're immortal. I don't remember being tired when I was a teenager.
Yeah,
I missed that.
But that's the beauty of that time of your life, right? Like your body is made to just do incredible things.
Well, if that's your mentality too, eventually it's going to catch up to you. I said I didn't train very smart. I always thought if I just go harder than I'm asked, I'll be better than I'm expected to be. Mm-hmm. And you get to a point where like you need to recover, like right. You need to back off. And I never really backed off as much as I wish I should have. So.
Well, and that's a lot of what they're learning too. Like, you talk about tapering for a race, like, swimming like incredible amounts of, laps, we're practiced all the way up to the race is not going to make you better at the race day. Like there's, you've got to taper a little bit your workouts so that your body is as prepared and well rested as possible.
Yeah. And you asked me one thing about what my parents kind of gave to me through their experiences was making sure that I didn't do too much too young. My mom was part of like what they called like the garbage yardage era. She grew up in like the late 70s, early 80s, where they were throwing
garbage yardage,
like 10,000 yard workouts twice a day. And I think it just hurts you mentally at the end. Like you're just ready to be done.
Yeah.
I think it's better to give kids a little bit less and fix their technique, and then eventually you can always come up in events later on.
Yeah.
So I see that a little bit when I travel and do camps, and some kids will tell me they did like 8,000 or 9,000 yard workouts that morning, and I'm like, holy crap, that's like child abuse.
Yeah. No, I mean, even football, like there's this whole thing about, I interviewed a college football coach, and he was talking about how they used to, hey, the new sheriff in town, get out there and start running sprints, and we're going to make you throw up and this and that. But he's like, and then we just have hamstring injury, calf strain, 3 weeks into practice, they were down 6 guys. And so they've had to do and these are 18, 19-year-old athletes, right? So they've really had to recalibrate their whole concept of how do you build these kids up to be their best for games? Who cares what you're going to do in the warm up?
I think that's just ego when coaches make their kids do that. I don't know if they're bragging to other coaches about, hey, look what I gave these guys, or if they just think they're going to make the best out of them.
Right. Well, I think it's it's kind of a warrior's mindset. You think about kind of the mental toughness angle.
That just reeks of insecurity. Quality is so much better than volume.
Well, no, and I think it was cool that he talked about how that's changed now, but how that was the old way. It was kind of that beat down. I remember my high school. I graduated in '93, and the high school football, the first thing you did if you tried out for high school football, it was August, and so it was 105 degrees, dry heat because it's California, but it's still 105 degrees, and you would run these 120-yard sprints, come back you had to do it on the minute, and you had to do it over and over and over and over, and it was I don't know, 20 times you had to do it, and all these linemen were throwing up, and passing out, and having heat, and it was just this thing you all had to do, and that nobody everyone just said, oh yeah, that's part of the deal, and it's just what was the point? What was the purpose of that? And some people will say it's mental toughness, some people will say it's a badge of honor, I don't know, but it's fairly pointless in my opinion as a coach.
I always found that the people that talked about their work ethics the most always ended up being the biggest pussies. Pardon my French.
Don't worry about it.
The more people talk about their effort and how much more they put in than others, I feel that it tends to be the opposite. The less people talk about who they are on a day-to-day basis, the more afraid of them you should be. I trained with Katie Ledecky for a week or two at the local training center. She never talks about how hard she works. She just does work that hard.
Yeah.
She's one of the best trainers I've ever seen or heard of. So the people who are bragging about oh, I did this, and that, no, you're just really insecure and trying to compensate for something for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those who can't talk about it, those who do, it's you're watching their effort. They don't have to talk about it, right? You see them in the pool, you're oh shit, they're working fucking hard.
And then there are people, I think, who are good trainers and hard workers. I think there's a difference between the two, but a lot of people assume that if you're doing really well on a day-to-day basis, you're a hard worker. You're probably suffering less than everyone else if you're performing at a high level consistently. I would say it's almost the opposite.
Explain it. When you say trainer, that to me, that means you're a coach.
I meant trainers and you're killing the workouts. You're leading everything that you're doing. You're lifting more weights. You're doing harder intervals, holding faster.
So you're paces. Kind of a leader in the practices.
Yeah, and that's indicative of genetics. That's not indicative of how hard you work. The guys who are suffering the most tend to be the walk-ons. Those are usually the hardest workers on the team because they have to just to keep up.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
But they get slammed on because they're in the back of the pack. And it's all about ego and who's winning in workouts.
Right. But, with a sport that's all about what's your time? It doesn't matter how many strokes it took you to get across the pool. It took you 13, took that guy 11 because he's got these super long arms and he's super powerful and he's got, great genetics. It still has everything to do with what the time was.
True, yeah.
Right? And so I think that's one of those. People would talk about how, Usain Bolt, he's 6'4", he's got these massive, legs are longer than the other guy, but hey, he's still got to get from point A to point B faster than anybody else.
True, and he probably does work really hard, but I'm sure if you switch the brains of everyone in his heat and put them in his body, they'd probably perform a little bit better.
Because they're all.
There is a genetic component you can't deny, but
that's interesting.
Some people don't like to separate that. I don't know if it just makes people not motivated to work hard if they know that they're fighting a losing battle against biology. The more I kind of look at the sport, the more I realize it's who your parents are, how they raise you and what body they gave you, that determines where you're going to get. Not just, sound kind of cold, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's always the underdog story of the Rudy or one of those stories that ends up like you hear about because it's like this person who shouldn't have made it, who found some sort of like will, drive, determination, and that's always like a great American story. But so often it is the biggest, the strongest, from a very early age who is the one that ends up making.
Oh yeah, even the guys who aren't making the Olympic team, who are in like the semifinals at Olympic trials, are genetic anomalies. But you don't realize that because you've lost perspective completely. Like you're on the edge of humanity, but you're only looking up, so you don't really recognize it or enjoy it.
Interesting. What do you remember, just to finish with the 2016 Olympics, what do you remember about swimming that leg of the 4x200? Like, take me back to that moment. Like, were you, what leg of the race? Was you the first?
I was the lead off in the morning.
Okay. So in the morning, was that semifinals?
That would have been, luckily for relays, it's just prelims finals. God, that'd be boring. Yeah, just prelims.
Okay. And did you swim in the later heats?
Nope, just in the morning. I wasn't even expected to make the relay, so I was lucky. Let off, did best time. Felt like any other meet, to be honest. And it was prelims, so granted it wasn't as intense as the finals.
Yeah.
So there wasn't too much pressure. It was just like, hey, don't false start. Just try your best. We'll be good.
Yeah.
So it was a team effort, and I think that alleviates some of the pressure, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like you're doing it with other guys, and they're behind you.
You can do your best, pass it off, and then,
Yeah, it's more like just don't screw it up. Like you don't have to worry about being first in the morning. Just like be safe.
Right. Don't false start. Don't mess us up.
And then in finals, the relay won. I'm like, hey, cool. Like got a medal.
Okay.
So it's interesting because it's a bit of a bench warmer in a way, not to disparage anyone who's got a medal from being on a prelim relay, but like I'm basically like just the guy who passed it off to the guy who shot, which is pretty cool. You get the title,
right?
But at the same time, I don't want to like overstate it and tell everyone like, hey, I'm a gold medalist. Like, yeah, well, maybe.
Well, you played a part,
but
you weren't in that final heat that like people would see on the TV and be like, oh, those four, won the medal for us.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, I guess you get the status that comes along with it, whatever that is in swimming, which is probably nothing.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a cool experience to even just witness. I thought it was awesome to be a part of because I just got to swim with guys and watch guys who I grew up watching on TV. So it was very, I don't know, surreal. It just makes everyone seem more human when you meet them in person.
Right.
But when you look at someone on the television, they seem a bit more godlike and they're more on a pedestal. It's like, oh, these are real people.
So you're 27, you work out a lot over at Lifetime Fitness in the Arboretum. What are some of your goals right now? Like, what are you working towards kind of post-swimming career?
I am halfway through officer candidate school for the Marines. I've been twice. The first time I got COVID. The second time I broke my pelvis. Luckily I'm being retained. I only have to go through like the second half of it for the most part next May. So I'm just trying to stay in shape, not get too heavy.
Okay. And what does that training program that you're going to go through in May look like?
It's just a lot of running with like weight, and picking up heavy objects and setting them down, doing what you're told.
Okay.
I'm excited about it. It's been a process. Applying as an officer is a bit longer of a process than enlisting, so it's, I don't know, been a bit tedious, but I've liked what I've seen and witnessed so far. The routine and the structure of it seems very similar to being an athlete. I like having a regimented schedule, so I'm looking forward to it.
Is that what drew you to being a Marine?
It's a big part of it, yeah, and there's a physical aspect of it too. When I was there this summer, you're on your feet, I don't know, 14, 15 hours a day, and you got other stuff you got to do. It's nice to be busy. It makes time go by fast. It's good to have goals. Right now, kind of just aloof. I'm a bit of a vagrant. Travel from town to town, teaching clinics, and luckily I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that for a living until that time comes that I go back. So,
what do you love most about the experience of teaching others, kids and such, or masters? Like, what part of that relationship really turns your juices up?
It's an interesting perspective watching someone go through the same thing that you did, because I just didn't enjoy it when I was the age of the kids that I was teaching. I just felt like it was something I had to do, like brushing my teeth, and I just try to share the message that like you can perform well and enjoy it. You don't have to threaten yourself to reach your goals. And I also like correcting and I guess trying to perfect technique in a way. Not that I was ever perfect, but I mean, there's things you can kind of see as like a former athlete. Like if you were to watch someone who played basketball and you want to correct their shot and you walk them through it, eventually I feel like you get some satisfaction out of seeing them, shoot a perfect free throw or something along those lines.
Right.
So
yeah, knowing that just some little slight modification is going to help them long term.
It kind of feels like building something, and hopefully it can, they can retain it. Because I remember learning things from guys you've interviewed, like Brendan Hansen, when I went to like a swim camp when I was younger, that stuck with me my whole career. So hopefully I can leave just a small imprint, and if not, just be like, I don't know, a positive, role model in some sense.
Yeah. Is the tape still on the locker that Brendan talks about, the like man on a mission? He talked about that. I think he mentioned it was still at UT. Do you remember anything about that? He put like man on a mission on his locker, like, and at the when he was 19 years old.
I've heard the story, but he was a bit before my time, so maybe not.
Well, I thought he mentioned that it was still there. That was why I asked, because I thought it like became kind of a thing that everyone wanted that locker after he left.
I don't remember, actually.
Well, clearly not, because I think that would have probably come up at some point. But you mentioned this when you talked about you can enjoy swimming, as a kid, and not, you said, like threaten your, like, not like you were kind of
like you have threaten. To do this or else. You give yourself like an ultimatum.
Like so that was kind of like a thing that you felt like you were doing.
And I can see kids that feel that way too. Even the younger ones, like if we get up and race 25s in a clinic, the ones that get really, really nervous, I can tell those are the ones that are a little bit too intense. Right. And those are the ones that could definitely, be helped if you just kind of pull them aside and tell them like, hey, it's not a big deal. But right. I mean, it takes a little bit more than just a few words. You can kind of, I don't know, I feel like make a small change and eventually they can kind of work through that on their own.
Well, and, especially somebody that has achieved what you achieved, from hearing it from you is much different than hearing it from their dad or their mom. I mean, you're fortunate to have parents that were at such a high level, but like, I mean, it's one thing if I tell my son something, but if he gets, if an NBA basketball player tells him, hey, try this, probably going to listen a little bit differently.
Yeah, and it's been interesting also to witness like the parents and how they react with their kids too. Because I'd never been like a full-time coach of like a club team or anything, but you can also tell which parents put more pressure on their kids just by their demeanor and how they're kind of interviewing their kids,
like the outcome.
And I'm like, oh my God, I'm thankful I didn't have that kind of breathing down my neck. And then there's some parents who just don't care and don't know anything about swimming. And sometimes I wonder if that's better than parents who, I don't know, are almost like tiger moms in a way.
Right.
So I have no idea. I don't know the right way to raise a kid. Thank God.
Yeah, you got time. You got time. Let me ask you this. So you talk about, this idea of like being able to kind of, it's just an event. You talk about the prelims of the Olympics. Like it just felt like another race. I had an interview with a sports psychologist, and he talked about the three things that don't matter are the size of the trophy, the amount of people in the stands, and the name of the event. And he was basically like, strip all that away and just do what you do, right? Like, so what? It's the Olympics. So what? There's 50 million people watching it across the United States or across the world. Like, strip all those things away. The only thing that matters is you and the pool, and your relationship to the race. And I think that's always probably going to help those nerves settle down, because it just just hearing you talk about seeing those kids and how much they're kind of knowing the ones that are really like taking it a little too seriously. It just reminds me like there's mental health issues wrapped up into the pressure that comes with being either being elite or trying to earn the right to be elite.
And I think certain, I don't know, mental disorders can help you in a way too, if you can find a way to, kind of tune in and use negative energy. So it just depends on your outlook and how you can kind of funnel your thoughts and how you feel.
Yeah.
But there's more than one way to skin a cat. I've only seen the world through my eyes, and everyone thinks so differently. I don't really feel like I know anything the older I get.
Right. It's all of our own perspectives, right? Like, I think that's what's so unique about an interview. Hold on a second. I think that's what's so unique about interviewing different people is like, just because I interviewed Brendan doesn't mean like, oh, we got that checked off. Now we know what a swimmer should do, right? Like, no, every athlete, every individual is going to have a different perspective and on what works for them and what, how they kind of identify with the sport, with how they deal with life. So what, you mentioned like using your neuroses or your kind of unique pacadiddles and talk about that more. Like how did you kind of leverage that or figure that out for yourself?
I remember when I was a kid, I used to play with like these, Thomas the Tank Engine little train sets.
Yeah.
And before I'd set out to build like whatever, I don't know, track I'd make, I'd like organize the pieces really, I don't know, neurotically. That was just kind of my personality as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I don't know. I was able to be a bit compulsive and work out and use that to my advantage, but it also ended up being a disadvantage too. Like I felt like it helped me stay consistent with splits and be motivated to be able to do that every day. But on the flip side, if I wasn't hitting the times that I wanted to on a daily basis, it'd ruin my day. So
yeah,
it's just a balance. I have a poor relationship with the clock, so.
Like because it represents your success?
Yeah, pretty much. So now, like, I still swim, but I don't look at the clock. I want nothing to do with it. So that was just kind of where I kind of threw myself at.
Right.
And
like do it for the enjoyment of just being in the pool and feeling it.
But I felt like it also helped me because I didn't really feel like I was ever burned out because I was too distracted by the times. Whereas I think some people get really distracted by their pain, and that can really wear on you mentally, like tremendously. So I'm thankful I had that.
Yeah. Well, and there's the chase. Like the time represents like something you're chasing. And I think there's such a, chasing is achieving. Like you're chasing achievement. There's a feeling of achievement. There's a struggle. There's a endorphin release when you get where you want to go or hit that time. But it also is there's a not enoughness that I think every human being feels on some level. Like, and, some people let that overwhelm them and end up, without, having addictions and things like that. And other people take that not enoughness and it turns to fuel for, well, I'm going to chase this because that's going to get me closer to that feeling of being kind of valuable or being worthy or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of channeling your energy in a way, right. And internalizing how you feel about what you're doing. Like you can associate pain with success, or you can associate it with your anxieties and your failures. And you can kind of tell who feels what way by the way they carry themselves, at the end of their careers. And I think for a lot of the people, it's the latter, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
I feel fortunate enough that I don't feel that way. I don't feel like I suffered through swimming. I think a lot of people feel like they suffered through their sport because they didn't get to where they wanted to be. So they just associate this activity with just negative emotion. I feel like a lot of people feel that way about a lot of sports. So it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you had that early on, but somehow like kind of found yourself in the sport and allowed yourself to kind of like.
No, it was all my parents. Yeah, they just kind of helped me kind of shift the mentality and kind of, I don't know, just focus on what really matters. Because even if you get a gold medal in swimming or multiple, no one cares, man. Like it's not a big deal. And I wish I could just tell 4-year-old me that like it's just a trinket. It's going to end up in a box in a shed somewhere.
You mean you don't wear it around My son got a gold medal in karate a couple weekends ago, and he wore it for about 12 hours, and now it just hangs on the wall, and it's just a medal, right? But like it has so much value in that moment that you've earned it, but then a few days later you forget about it.
Yeah, and awards are kind of weird in that way. Some people are very materialistic about their athletic careers, like the trophies that mean something. It's kind of like a bookmark and a stepping stone. I obsessed more about like the times and the ideas of like what that means. Like breaking a record seems more interesting than getting a medal, but I feel like for most people they'd rather have like a gold medal than a world record. I see it the other way around.
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather say I did something no human did ever than just say I was the best at something 1 year.
Right.
I don't know about you.
I mean, I think the way there are so many great athletes, swimmers, to stay on target here with our conversation, that, you know, maybe world record holders at certain, you know, during the 3 or 4 years. Brendan Henson was an example of that. Like, he had held world records in the breaststroke, but just, you know, for whatever reason, the Olympics didn't earn the gold, or, you know, and
Well, there's a Japanese swimmer who cheated, but
yeah, well, there's that too. That's another part of that too. But I mean, you know, you can, and I think Brendan has a good perspective on what was important.
I think I'd be way more pissed off. He seems to deal with it really well. That would eat at me, man. Because for the most part, in most events, you can't cheat. Like, but in breaststroke, that's just a different sport in and of itself. There are swimmers, and then there are breaststrokers.
That's funny. Yeah. It does seems so odd. I mean, freestyle is literally like, you know, it's you can do any stroke you want, right? In freestyle, like, it's just, everyone does the crawl because it's the fastest stroke. But nobody would like complain if somebody like kicked off the wall and did a, you know, dolphin kick versus flutter kick. I mean, nobody cares.
Yeah, I mean, the winner of the 2012 Olympics admitted to cheating and taking multiple dolphin kicks, and he didn't get disqualified. Fina has no backbone. But and luckily, I'm not big enough deal for that to even mean anything.
Right. But I mean,
I won't get in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, you know, a world record of whatever, you know, to be the best at something, to have the world record, I think is much more interesting than, you know, to have a medal, you know, because a lot of times that could be that the other people, the other best in the world didn't show up well that day, and you may not have gotten their best.
That's the thing that sucks about swimming is the whole sport revolves around the Olympics, and even though I don't so many more people ask me, like, what sport you play? It's like, oh, I swam. He goes, oh, like the Olympics? I'm like, something like that. And like, you got a medal, right? I'm like, what if I didn't?
But that's, you know, you talked about people, like, you can kind of tell when somebody is like coming from that not enoughness. I just think that people project their not enoughness on you. Like, oh, you're an athlete. Oh, you swam. Oh, you went to the Olympics. Like, they're immediately like judging themselves because you're in their mind like a super achiever, right? Like, I was interviewing an actor, and she said, everyone always asks me, how do you memorize your lines? Like, that's such a stupid question. Actors, that's not something any actor worries about. It's about character. It's about performance. Like, but people always project on the thing that they couldn't imagine doing. Like, it's so, you know, it's weird how people project onto
that's an
athletes specifically. Like, people just like, and you know, I mean, you and I are tall. Like, I work out a lot, so I've got a lot of muscle. Like, people project on me all the time, like, about, you know, being something or believing, or I must have always been this way. And that has everything to do with them. It has nothing to do with what I'm putting out there.
I wish I was good at psychoanalyzing people, but I'm not. Don't even know myself that well.
I think you're doing a pretty good job, considering like the perspective you have already on yourself in the sport. I think that's the hardest thing to do, is understand yourself. And then from there, I think trying to figure out what makes other people tick too.
No, I think for me, it's just I've been humbled. There are a lot of swimmers who don't have the accolades I have just because of bad career timing. Like, there are way better swimmers than me that don't have gold medals just because of like bad timing with like the Olympics, because that's the pinnacle. And if you don't hit your prime then, you don't feel like your career is defined the way it should be. And it sucks.
Well, too, I mean, but you made a decision, you know, you decided, I got these amazing, like, national champion swimmers swimming the events that I was, you know, recruited to do, right? What if I swam a little bit longer? What if I went a little bit farther? There's a whole area here that's open, has an opportunity. So, like, you have to give yourself some credit for that. It's like, you made a decision to put yourself in a place to be more successful. If I was a power forward in high school and I got recruited to a college and they were like, hey, you know, we got this guy, he's 7'1", he's got a 3-point shot where he's kind of our stretch 4. You know, you might want to work on your dribbling skills and facing the basket and be our 3, because our 3 is about to graduate. Like, I would be stupid to like, I'm going to be a postman. That's who I am. You know what I mean? Like, I think that an athlete has to be able to see the opportunity and take it.
Yeah, I understand. I just always felt like there was a bit of more prestige in different events. I guess it's that way different positions in basketball are
Sure.
not respected more, but are viewed differently and seem more desirable. Like I always fell in love with the 100 free and 100 fly, but that was never what it was going to end up being.
Yeah, but you also grew up in the era of Michael Phelps, right?
Yeah, that's true.
I remember watching Janet Evans in 1984, 1988, going like, well, now I like the long distance because I just thought Janet Evans hung the moon.
It is interesting how different people can define different sports.
And Kaylee Ledecky is probably doing that for a lot of young swimmers right now. Is like they see her and they say, look at that, that's cool.
I would hope so. But I always felt like with swimming, you get forgotten so quickly. It's not like you're not as immortalized as other sports.
I mean, that might be, but
like when I was a kid, I didn't know who Mark Spitz was.
Yeah.
Phelps broke Mark Spitz's record. I'm like, who is that?
So, but you're 27, I'm 47, and I didn't know who Mark Spitz was until they were talking about Phelps. But I think that's, it's kind of like people talking about Bill Russell, like this great, he was 6'9", by the way, Bill Russell. And, it's pretty incredible that Bill Russell was kind of an undersized center and dominated the most dominant center of all time in Wilt Chamberlain, like every NBA finals. So, I mean, but like that's a legend. But these young guys, they don't know who Bill Russell is.
They don't?
Care. Not really.
I've heard the name.
The name's thrown out there, but But I think that's the Mark Spitz is that kind of guy, like transcended the sport. But I mean, I don't know. The reality is, you're right. Like people think about swimming for one time every 4 years, and it's not World Championships. Nobody cares. It's the Olympics, and it's the Michael Phelps story. It's what's the new guy, Dressel?
Caleb Dressel, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we need that like kind of super champion that we, Katie Ledecky can be that, was that too, like, but that person to get behind that we can tell the story and watch them win and feel good about ourselves. And it's and just they kind of ram it down our throats, and then we forget again for 4 more years. So
I do find that kind of comforting. I wish I could have told my younger self that, like, no matter how good you get, you will be forgotten.
Well, and maybe that's great. Like, I mean, there's only like a few people that can't walk down the street because they're just so famous, right? Like certain movie stars, like I don't know how many told me that, like literally like 10 different people told me that Brad Pitt was in Austin because of, F1. And I'm like, why do I care? But like, he's one of those people where like, if he's in town, everyone's like a buzz, right? But there's like 20 of those on the planet, right? And the rest of us like enjoy like just being,
That sounds cool when you're like 12 years old, but I'm sure for someone who's like middle-aged, that's an absolute nightmare.
Right? Like you want to go to Lifetime Fitness and do your workout and get your butt kicked and not get like, hey bud, hey, can I get a photo with you? Hey, aren't you that gold medalist guy? Like, I mean, Michael Phelps probably is that, like he has that kind of like, celebrity where he gets probably stopped all the time, like for the rest of his life.
And one bad incident, and you just have a group of people that look at you negatively, even if you just had a bad day or couldn't sign an autograph.
And that's the love and hate of celebrity. But I mean, I think when we do something great, like I have a goal this spring. I'm gonna do a bodybuilding show. I've never done a bodybuilding show my entire life. I'm 47 years old. Why am I doing it now? Because I always wanted to do it. I was 13 years old looking at Muscle Fitness magazine, idolizing Arnold Schwarzenegger. I never did it. I'm doing it now, right? So I don't care if I win a medal. Like, I don't care if I get dead last. Like, I just want to get up there and like experience like a bodybuilding show and just, you know what? I don't care if my trophy's this big or non-existent. Doesn't matter to me. That's not why I'm doing it.
Do you wish you could have the mentality when you were younger, when you were playing?
Absolutely. Yeah. To just like be doing it for the joy of the great thing about bodybuilding is such a slow process. There's no, like, it's the only sport that like what you do to do the sport is not what you do in the performance of the sport. So you don't go on stage and do dumbbell bench press. You don't do anything in the gym. All you do is get up there and show the work. And the work is so slow because, I mean, I am choosing not to do steroids, right? So that slows everything down about 500%. But it's just this day-to-day slow process of working out, eating well, sleeping, drinking water, blah, 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 and then I go up on stage and it's like, this is what I've done. And I don't give a shit what the award is, right? It's just like that stamp of like, fucking I did it, right?
I wish I had that when I competed, man. That's hard to find immediately. I don't know if a lot of young athletes have that.
Well, but I think that's a perspective that I can only have at 47.
I know. I wish you could put your brain in a younger body would be the ideal.
Well, no, I think it wasn't like the wisdom is wasted. I mean, you get the wisdom after you need it, right? Like, and that's why great coaches are there for a reason. Like Eddie Reese, like the guy has seen everyone.
Do you think
right?
you have to do your sport or do it well to be a good coach or to live it to some extent?
I think you have to, as a coach, have experienced like a high level of something, right? Or I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but I think you have to understand something about what the athlete is going through. You don't necessarily need to be like, I swam in the Olympics and I'm training you to swim in the Olympics, and that apples to apples comparison is necessary. But I think there has to be some sort of like apples to apples thing that you can say, like, I know what you're going through here. Not because I read it in a book, but like, I can tell you, I can remember that in my own life in some way. And, there's many times when I think the athlete exceeds the coach's level, but the coach has to know something about what that feels like. Because otherwise they can't have perspective on it. They're just going to be like, well, I hear that, you should, not care so much. Well, how do you know, coach?
Yeah, I agree. And I always have that opinion towards like sports broadcasters who like have clearly never played the game, even like at like an elite high school level. And I'm like, why do I care about your opinion, man?
Yeah, it's hard. I think, when that's, this is our society is all about now, like, the Twitter, everyone's got an opinion, everyone gets on social and bashes this person or, and I think that's, as an athlete or somebody who like really cares about the experience, of pursuing something and wanting that to kind of not wanting to ruin it with just like hearing all the outside noise. I think that can be frustrating, but you have to find a way to tune that stuff out.
Yeah, that's the one thing I liked about swimming is that the outside noise wasn't really there because you're either faster or you're not. Whereas with basketball, you can kind of argue who's the best center in the league or what team is better. Right. It just depends on the day that those guys are playing against each other is going to determine who's going to win the game. It's almost a bit of luck.
You're right. I mean, Kobe never faced LeBron in the finals.
They never did?
Never faced him in the finals.
Oh.
Yeah, they always kind of missed each other. Like it was, and so you can always make these comparisons, Jordan and Kobe, whatever. But yeah, but that's the great thing about swimming, in that sense that like, this is my time, this was his time. The Mark Spitz like conversation where he says like, well, if I was swimming at this time, I would have figured out how to. Okay, Spitz, like, let's calm down.
Yeah, I remember hearing that in 2008. I remember thinking, man, I hope when I'm 50, I don't compare myself. I can just be happy for who's competing.
Yeah. I think that's and that's probably why he was so great back then. Is that he had this insatiable competitiveness that like,
I don't know. I look at some times back from like the 60s and the 50s, and I'm like, I could have done that at like age 14. Like, I think the talent pools within each sport has gotten so much bigger that if you do take those athletes and you were to clone them and put them into present day, they'd just be kind of average.
Well, and access too. I mean, people that never would have had access to a pool are having access.
Swimming is kind of like more of a white collar sport.
Yeah, it had been. I think it's less though. I mean, you see more like in America, you see more swimmers that are all ethnicities.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's not a very interesting sport. But I appreciate you bringing me on here.
No, this is great, man. I appreciate you. I love Clark's just sober perspective of swimming, the sport itself, competition, where are the things that he really learned, and even like the way he had to be or thought he had to be in order to be competitive. So interesting. And I want you to think about your own life and where you might be assuming you have to be a certain way or act a certain way to be that elite athlete, when actually you can settle back in and just be yourself and still be elite. More episodes coming your way from people of all industries, all backgrounds, sharing their perspectives. Thanks again for listening to the Mindset Forge podcast.